The myth of objectivity. Is reality being constructed by technology? Now, the concept of objectivity has long been at the core of Western epistemology. From the metaphysical speculations of Plato to the empirical rigour of modern science, objectivity has been understood as the capacity to describe reality as it exists, independently of observers. Yet, this ideal has increasingly come under pressure. The technological construction of reality, the book I wrote with my good friend Professor Dionysios Demetis, argues that contemporary technological systems do not merely represent reality, rather they actively construct it. When this claim is placed alongside systems theorists like Heinz von Foerster and the insights from modern physicists, the notion of objectivity begins to dissolve. What emerges instead is a picture of reality as contingent, observer-dependent and technologically mediated. The notion of objectivity can be seen in ancient Greek philosophy. Plato used the allegory of humanity living in a cave, observing flickering shadows from the real world projected onto the cave wall. He asked, was it possible for an enlightened individual to go out of the cave into the sunshine, to see reality other than as vain shadows? His theory of forms posits a non-material realm of perfect, unchanging templates, accessible only through intellect and reason, as opposed to the realm of appearance, experienced through our senses. Thus he establishes a foundational separation between appearance and reality, suggesting that true knowledge must transcend subjective perception. Following on, Aristotle was more empirically grounded, maintaining that the world possesses essential properties that can be systematically identified. This trajectory continued into modern philosophy. René Descartes sought irrefutable knowledge by isolating the thinking subject, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, yet assuming the necessity of an objective material external world. Immanuel Kant complicated this picture by distinguishing between phenomena, what we can know through our senses, and noumena, things in themselves, which remain independent of human perception. For Kant, objectivity is no longer direct access to reality, but the structured output of human cognition, shared across rational agents. Thus, even within classical philosophy, objectivity begins to shift from correspondence to an independent world towards a form of intersubjective agreement. A decisive break occurs in systems theory. Heinz von Foerster says that objectivity is the illusion that observations can be made without an observer, fundamentally challenging the traditional epistemology. In second-order cybernetics, the observer is always part of the system being observed. There can be no external vantage point from which reality is neutrally described. This introduces reflexivity. Descriptions of systems must include the conditions of their own production. Knowledge becomes self-referential rather than linear, constructed through recursive interactions. The observer does not discover reality, but participates in its formation. This perspective aligns closely with our arguments in the technological construction of reality, where technological systems are understood to be self-referential structures that generate their own operational realities. For instance, in financial markets, value is not an intrinsic property, but the outcome of computational processes, models, and institutional practices. What counts as real within the system is defined by its internal logic. Here we have a constructivist insight. Objectivity in this context is no longer a matter of accurate representation, but of systemic coherence. A statement is objective if it functions effectively within a given system, not if it corresponds to an independent reality. Dionysios and I extend such insights by emphasizing the role of technology in shaping reality. Unlike earlier forms of mediation, contemporary technologies operate at a scale and level of integration that renders their influence largely invisible. Algorithms, databases, and digital infrastructures determine what is recorded, what's measured, and acted upon. These systems rely on classifications, thresholds, and models that necessarily exclude as much as they include. As a result, they do not passively capture reality, but actively delimit it. What falls outside the system's parameters effectively ceases to exist within its operational domain. This argument resonates with Michel Foucault's analysis of knowledge and power. For Foucault, regimes of truth, which is a network of power and knowledge, define the boundaries of what can be known and what can be said. Technological systems can be seen as contemporary instantiations of such regimes, embedding epistemological assumptions into material infrastructures. The consequence is a proliferation of realities. Different systems, financial, medical, political, legal, etc., produce different versions of the world, each internally consistent, but not reducible to a single overarching truth. Objectivity fragments into system-specific operational validity. The erosion of objectivity is not limited to the social and technological domains. Modern physics has also destabilized the notion of an observer-independent reality. Quantum mechanics demonstrates that the act of measurement influences the system being measured, undermining the idea of passive observation. Physicists have explored frameworks that suggest reality may differ depending on the observer's frame of reference. In these models, multiple potentially incompatible descriptions can coexist, each valid within its own context. Earlier developments such as Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle already indicated that knowledge is fundamentally limited and context dependent. We cannot fully determine all properties of a system simultaneously. Observation imposes constraints. These insights reinforce the system's theoretical critique. Observation is not a neutral act, but an intervention that helps constitute the reality it seeks to describe. The dream of a detached, objective perspective becomes untenable, particularly at the level of fundamental physics. In the light of these critiques, objectivity is increasingly replaced by alternative epistemological frameworks. One such framework is intersubjectivity, where truth is grounded in shared agreement rather than correspondence with an independent reality. Jürgen Habermas, for instance, locates validity in communicative processes that enable consensus among rational agents. Another approach is radical constructivism, associated with thinkers like von Foerster, which views knowledge as a tool for navigating experience rather than representing an external world. Truth becomes a matter of viability rather than accuracy. Now, our book shows how these philosophical positions become materialized in technological systems. Reality is not only constructed cognitively or socially, but also technologically. Systems stabilize certain constructions, making them appear objective and inevitable. The rejection of objectivity raises a critical question. How can competing claims be evaluated? If all realities are constructed, does this lead to a form of relativism? The answer lies in recognizing that not all constructions are equal. Technological systems are embedded in networks of power, shaped by institutional interests and design choices. As Foucault emphasizes, knowledge is inseparable from power. Systems that define reality also structure possibilities for action. Therefore, the critique of objectivity does not eliminate the need for judgment, it shifts its focus. Instead of evaluating statements based on their correspondence to reality, we must assess the systems that produce them. Questions of accountability, transparency, and inclusion become central. Now, in this sense, the loss of objectivity intensifies rather than diminishes the ethical and the political stakes of knowledge. Our critique of objectivity represents both a continuation of philosophical inquiry and a response to new technological conditions. From Plato to Kant, thinkers have grappled with the relationship between perception and reality. What distinguishes this contemporary moment is the role of technology in operationalizing epistemology. In earlier periods, the limits of knowledge were primarily theoretical concerns. Today, they are embedded in infrastructure that shape everyday life. Systems do not merely fail to capture reality, they actively produce it. This transformation demands an interdisciplinary approach combining philosophy, systems theory, and technical analysis. Objectivity, once regarded as a foundation of knowledge, now appears as a historically contingent construct. It was a useful ideal, which facilitated scientific progress, but which cannot withstand contemporary scrutiny. The technological creation of reality demonstrates that reality is increasingly shaped by technological systems that define what can be known and acted upon. What combined in the insights of Heinz von Foerster and quantum mechanics, the conclusion is clear. There is no access to a purely observer-independent world. Instead, reality emerges through interaction among observers, systems, and technologies. The challenge then is not to recover objectivity, but to rethink knowledge in its absence. This involves recognizing the constructed nature of reality while remaining critically engaged with the systems that produce it. Truth becomes not a mirror of the world, but a dynamic, situated process, one that must be continually examined, contested, and reconfigured. In this shift, the end of objectivity is not a loss, but a transformation, from certainty to reflexivity, from representation to construction, from passive observation to active participation in the making of reality. Thank you.